Hello, welcome. Ooh. Welcome to History Chats this afternoon. Um, we're going to get started in just a bit. Exciting program today. It's one that I'm very excited to share with you about some maps. That's the theme this month. If you're watching live, welcome. Just hang out for a couple minutes. We're going to start at 12:30. Just always want to give a chance for people to join. If you're watching after the fact, you can skip ahead about 3-4 minutes if you want to just get to the program. But yeah, just gonna make sure this sounds okay. Yeah, so as I said, today we're doing some the first of March MAPness, which is our theme here. We're gonna be talking about maps this month. Something we did last month as well, or sorry, last year in March. Hasn't been that long, or a little longer than that. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Maps are fun to get into because they might seem kind of simple or mundane, but they can tell us a lot about the past, and so it's a great opportunity to dig into some of the resources we have here and elsewhere, and tell some stories about Marathon County in a very graphical way. So, and today we're going to be talking about the how Marathon County got its shape, looking through some county maps, or I should say maps of Wisconsin that have counties. This is going to be specifically the Marathon County maps. Those come a little bit later, but we'll get there. Um, yeah. So I guess while we're waiting here, our next History Speaks coming up, by the way, is going to be in April. It's the first week of April, first Saturday. This is going to be William Jennings Bryan, the very charismatic and important figure in American history, sort of the progressive era back in the 1800s into the 1900s. And he actually stopped here campaigning in Wausau once or twice. And so we're going to have a local history teacher, Paul Clark, is going to come in and share with us a little bit about him and about his life, and also what we know here about his interaction in Wausau. That'll be a great program, I'm sure. Paul always does a great job with that. And yeah, if you weren't here Saturday, if you didn't catch that, we also had a great program. Rick Ryer, the first one that we did this year, here in February. Rick Ryer from Wisconsin Public Radio and Public Media. He talked about the history of public media in Wisconsin. It's a great program. The recording is there if you want to go back and watch that. Yeah, I don't often talk about stuff we did in the past tense here as part of our things, but yeah, it's still pretty new. If you haven't gotten a chance, that's there. Cool. So if you've not joined before, if you're watching live, we are going to, basically the way this is going to work is we're going to, I'm just going to do the program, and then if you have any questions at any point, feel free to drop those into the chat, the comment section if you're watching, depending on the different formats. And yeah, I'll maybe get to some question and answers at the end. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. Okay. Let's get started. Hi. Take these off here. I think the sound should be good. Yes, this is a great program. So we're looking at maps. Like I said, we're looking at maps today and this month. Maps are great not only because they can, you can look at a map and you can see what things were like in that time, but you can also use them to compare them with other maps to show change over time in a really interesting way. And one of the things that I think certainly I've been really interested in, and I think generally people are, is why does Marathon County look like this? Right? We have this sort of unique rectangle with a notch cut out. When we got started back in 1880, when Marathon County was created, it looked like this. This is this red bit in here. It went all the way to the state line with Michigan, which itself isn't quite sorted yet. Um, and by looking at what's in between here, and you know, early maps in the 1800s until turn of the century, actually before that, we'll see how we eventually get to this shape. Doesn't necessarily it's not just about the story of how this happens, but for Marathon County, but for the wider Wisconsin as well. It really I didn't realize when I came up with this idea to talk about this, that this was going to be a story of wider Wisconsin and not just Marathon County, but it ended up being something I learned a lot about. So we're going to start here with the concept of counties and the idea that when Marathon, or when I should say, when Wisconsin becomes a state, we enter the Union as a new state in the Union. This is 1848. We already had counties. We had a few of them. Not this many. This is what it looks like today. We have 72 counties. But of course, this is after decades and generations and centuries, really, of well, I guess at least 1 century, maybe 2, of development from Wisconsin. And so how do we get here is an interesting thing. Because again, here's a map from 1846. This is about a year and a half, 2 years before Marathon County, or before Wisconsin becomes a state. And you can see pretty clearly that, there's a lot of room left. We've got some states down here in the bottom, and where people are starting to settle by this point. So the counties are starting to take shape a little bit, but you still have a lot that's yet to really be explored. By 1848, there were people in what is now Marathon County, doing some lumbering, and then of course Native Americans gives a whole different aspect to this too. They don't necessarily fit on this map very nicely, but yeah. This is an even earlier map from about 12 years earlier. The improved map of territories of Michigan and Wisconsin, very French there. At this point, Michigan's got some settlement, kind of similar to what we see later, but in the sense that there's this big open bit that hasn't been settled yet. But here in Wisconsin, there's kind of 4. There's 4 counties. There's Milwaukee, Iowa, Crawford, and Brown. And then up here we have Michilimackinac County, kind of stretching into Michigan, and then Chippewa. Interesting, right? And again, the logic here is, why create a bunch of counties? Like, we know that they're going to be smaller than this, but there's not enough people living there. And until we know, not just from a perspective of managing the land, like it's easier to have not to have a county for 6 families. That's probably not the most efficient way to administrate the land. But it's also a matter of we don't know where the population is going to come in. At some point, this will all get filled in. They know this back in the 1830s. Maybe it'll take a couple decades, maybe centuries, who knows? But it'll happen. And we don't want to create a bunch of divisions until we know that there's going to be people in those divisions. And we can kind of see that as we go. So one thing that's kind of interesting here, and I want to just kind of back and point this out. This is Carver's tract. Very interesting little side story that I'm not going to get into here, but it has to do with a British military guy who comes out and explores, and apparently gets signatures giving him land. And this is like, by this point in the 1830s, the United States had already denied the claim here, but apparently he got signatures from native chiefs to get this land. It didn't actually happen. It seems kind of likely, because he never really claimed it. His descendants did, and it's this whole thing. But it does speak to one of the other issues here, which is a lot of the reason that this isn't settled in part is because of all of those Native Americans. But in the course of the 1800s, the 30s, 40s, well, pretty much that, the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, the United States comes to agreements with a lot of the Native American tribes. This is a map that I added some color here to kind of give some variation. This is from the Blue Book in 1975. And it kind of gives, this is what was called the treaty lands. So this is the land that was given to the United States, or that they acquired through treaty, often through sales, but through other things, it's complicated. Many of these treaties are not honored for honest reasons and for dishonest reasons. But the point is that we can kind of see when things get granted here. So particularly, this is of importance. This is the 1836 Treaty of the Cedars, in which Marathon County is first really, I mean, you can see the seeds of it here, right? So mostly the Treaty of the Cedars had to do with this bit over here with the Menominee and the United States government, but it also, point two, was this tract of land that went up the Wisconsin River and give land and basically the mining rights, or specifically the timber rights, to 3 miles on each side of the river, going up to a point that's about where the Trap River enters into the Wisconsin. It's not super clear exactly where that end point is. Actually, probably is, but I don't know that off the top of my head. But yeah, around that point, around Brokaw, right? So this is the start. And over the next year, you're going to see the Chippewa or the Ojibwe, the larger group the Chippewa are part of. They make agreements giving what is now Marathon County, as do the Winnebago, which should probably be Ho-Chunk, but in the 70s they used the old sort of problematic word for the people. And the Sioux are there too. And of course, by the end of the 1840s, officially most of Wisconsin is, except for the reservations that get created, but that's not a story that I'm going to tackle here. The point is, and this is a more modern map showing the counties overlaid over them, along with some of the reservations. What's interesting is that the county lines don't correspond with the native agreements, right? It's not like, okay, we got this county, so now we're going to make a new county out of it. This is all, but that's not to say that it's not, they're not unrelated. Because if we look at things like that jut, that the Treaty of the Cedars that is the Wisconsin River, that starts people coming here. By the end of the 1830s, there's lumber operations kind of starting to get organized to go up here. And so by the 1840s, we're going to start to see people. And so again, even though the map is kind of off here, like the Wisconsin River doesn't kind of meander this far east and west, but there are people that are going to be there by this point. And so as we move away from 1846, and I want to specifically point out this county here, Portage, which is in a different place than you might expect it to be. This is actually, originally, Portage County was the county around the city of Portage. But then it grows. This is from 1849, after we become a state. We can zoom in here. And you can see that now Portage County goes all the way up the Wisconsin River. Because again, that's how people are going to get up there. That's where the lumbering is. Now, actually, by 1849, by this point in the year, Columbia County is created. And so what had originally been Portage is now not Portage. Even though the city of Portage is in it, it's now Columbia. Does that make sense? So Portage County then continues all the way to the state line with Michigan. And as time goes on, that's going to get split up as time goes on, right, as we see more people settle. And sometimes there's not really a rhyme or reason on how they do this. Sometimes, as in the case here, the larger area retains the old name. And then when you split off sort of a new county, they create a new name. Or in the case with Marathon County in 1850, they create a new name for it. So this is that map that we started with the 1850s. So this is the first time that Marathon exists, and we are right up here. So Portage keeps the old part, and now it's this line, and we're going to take that all the way, again, to the state line with Michigan, which is still being formulated. That'll happen later in the 1850s. We'll sort that out. For the time being, this is where people are. Now, what's really interesting is you can see these little squares, right? Well, hopefully you can see. I don't know how good the resolution is going to be on whatever you're viewing, but there's little squares in here. And that's where people are. And it really only goes as far as a Big Bull Falls. They haven't even surveyed this area for people being there yet, for selling land. And when we do that, that kind of indicates this. And you can see even just from the rivers here, like we know the river goes up here. We know all of the branches coming off of the Wisconsin. And we can kind of see them creeping out from the east and the western side, but there's still this big open area in between both sides that we just haven't been there to map yet. So to understand all of this, I think it's important to just give a refresher on the public land survey system, which might be new if you've never looked into this. So basically, if we look at Wisconsin, it's divided up into these squares, right? And honestly, if we look at the way that most of the counties are today, they confide to these little squares. And these are 6 by 6 mile squares. And basically the way that that works is if we go back to this map, this is the system that pretty much all of this uses. Oops. With the exception of Texas, most of the county or the states that get established after independence, they are going to use this system. So the way that it works is you take this baseline here, and every 6 miles north of that, there's a new line that's graded. It's usually hypothetical, although if you look at like a satellite map, you'll see roads, because that's frequently where they end up being. So we have these nice square tracts of land. But every 6 miles up is a new township, that's what we call it. So township 1 north. And so the way that this works, if we look at like Michigan, there's a southern part here. So the baseline, there could be a township north of the baseline or south. But in Wisconsin, the baseline is the southern border with Illinois. So everything is going to be north. So 6 miles is 1 north, another 6 miles is 2 north, etc. And then you have the fourth principal meridian. So you have this line here, and all of those squares, then you create another grid going east and west, range east, range west. And so every 6 miles, it's a new range east, 2 east, 3 east, etc. And this is important because, like I said, where these lines end up getting created are kind of usually based on this. Now, there's some problems with this, of course, in the fact that the Earth is round. And so if you try to put a square grid on top of it, it doesn't necessarily fit. So there's going to be adjustments in there that make it not perfect squares, but it's pretty close, at least in theory. So, we can go back to this map here in 1850, even though you can see this sort of like adjustment that needs to make here. The boundary with Portage isn't quite flush, but it's there. And in theory, that is the border that we have today with Portage and Wood counties. The western edge is also set. It's 1 range east. So we're only 1. So the first squares on the western edge of what is Marathon County in 1850 would be considered 2 east, and then whatever, north version there. But the eastern edge isn't quite set yet. And that's an interesting process of how this happens. It looks like it could be close, right? But it's actually only at 9. And today we have range 10 east. So there's another 6 miles that we get somewhere in there. If we go to 1856, and you can see by this point, that boundary with Michigan has been figured out. It is only at 9. So you can see here that there's a 10 here that's yet to be. And there's 2 counties that are important in this map, in addition to Marathon. Portage here gets that extra thing. If we go back to this map, it's flush, right? But by 1856, they get another township out of, in this case, Waupaca County. And I think this is partially because later in, I think, 1856, Wood County is going to get split. So what is now Portage here, just to kind of even it out, they get a little extra land. That's my guess. But the other important thing here is Shawano County gets created. And originally it was spelled Shaw-na, S-H-A-W-A-N-A-W. Shaw. No, S-H-A-W-A-N-A-W. Yeah. Shawano, right? Now this is important because there's some bits in between here. Oconto County, like Shawano County is here. We're gonna have to close that gap somewhere, and this becomes a bit of a fight over the late 50s and early 60s. So, for example, here in 1860, there's an act of Wisconsin legislature that gives that land and extends and evens out the border with Portage with Marathon. We get that extra land. So if we look here at Johnson's 1861 map of Michigan and Wisconsin, they go even further for some reason. I don't know. Honestly, this is hard to keep track of. We've got the Civil War happening right now, so the records aren't super clear. They, for some reason, gave us not 1, but 2 ranges extra into that area. So basically closing the gap to Shawano. And then for some reason they didn't give us this square. But by 1864, it'll be set correctly here. So we are at the right boundaries. Shawano closes the gap, so now we're at range 10 east. And as you can see here, the squares don't necessarily line up. That's why there's this little jut out on the east, but it is essentially the same range east. Anyway, this is probably more in-depth than you need. What I want to show here, though, is also, even here in 1864, look at all this empty space. Nobody's been up here yet. So Marathon County, it goes all the way up there, and that's great, but there's an understanding here that there's a lot of land that hasn't been surveyed yet. So eventually people are going to go up there and maybe farm or do whatever they're going to do. So Marathon County will not be this way forever. In 1866, basically this gets set here. So if we kind of zoom in, just to give it a little cleaner, I know the sectional map of this one isn't super easy to read, but here you can see pretty clearly, there we are at range 10. And this is also important that the Menominee Reservation gets established. Chief Oshkosh signed, and others of the Menominee tribe signed this, basically abandoning land west of the Mississippi where they were supposed to go, I'm pretty sure, at least outside of Wisconsin, and instead establishing this. And this creates a bit of an issue too, eventually, because it kind of creates a weird Shawano County, just kind of, but that's not necessarily something we need to worry about for this purposes here. So before we get into the other boundaries, we need to talk about the railroad. We go back to this map here. You can, or even, this map. One of the reasons that this is very clear is they're following the rivers, right? How do you get to a place? There are roads that you can take, but the roads get established after, connecting places that already exist. So for the most part, the early exploration and settlement of Wisconsin comes through the rivers. But the railroads change that. They actually don't want to go by the rivers because the rivers, not the most stable place to put a railroad right along the banks of a river, but also if that's where people are already settling, you get to be more expensive to have to buy up all that land to lay your tracks. And so they tend to go in other directions. And so what ends up happening is, in many places, it creates this new dynamic by the end of the 1860s. This is an 1883 map, and you can see that there's a bunch of different railroads. Just to clarify, there's this dotted line that goes here, this black dotted line. That's like ideal. They're like projecting like maybe we can do this. This would be fun. This would be great if we could do this. Some of these don't end up happening, but you can see the colored lines, which I'm just going to call by their colors because I know I'm going to get in trouble if I try to name them by the names at this point. But like the orange line, you got the green, yellow, and black, and brown. Now, just to give you an idea of how this all throws a wrench into everything, we need to look at 1874 in this petition by the people of Beaver in Clark County. Beaver is kind of a place here in between Withee and Curtis. A lot of these towns here that are on the this yellow line, by the way, didn't exist before the yellow line. The yellow line goes in by the around early 70s, and then the communities, come into being. So if you're here, right, in your Curtis, technically you're in the Clark County. Your county seat is down in Neillsville, right? The problem with the outline here is in order to get to Neillsville, you either have to go over the wilderness where there's not really great roads, there's not a great river to follow here, or you could take the railroad, but the railroad is no direct connection either. So in order to get to the county seat, you have to take a train all the way over to Chippewa Falls, down to Eau Claire, then go south to the Alma region, then go over to Neillsville. Or you could go the other direction of taking the train down to Junction City, then going down, and then going over, and then going up. And that's not the best way to get to the county seat to do business, right? So here they're petitioning, let's split up Marathon County. Again, everybody knows that eventually it's not going to be that whole, big monstrosity. We're going to have to divvy that up somehow. And so they see a chance, and they say here, like, look, it's probably not going to happen, but we just got to put our suggestion in here because before somebody else takes the land. Now this, I think, is the start of a proposed Colby County, which would have been somewhere in here. Again, kind of taking over Clark and Marathon counties at bits that would have been that central railroad area. This doesn't end up happening. Other projected counties that were named McPherson County, Manitowish County, and Pine County. But ultimately, it's none of those that happen. And instead, Jenny leaves us. Well, Jenny being the name for Merrill, right? Merrill, they adopt the name Merrill in 1881, so this is way before this. In fact, Jenny at this point, which is the location where the mill was up there, was very small. But again, it's time to now divvy up. Marathon County is big enough. We'll just create a horizontal line. And actually, to represent this, I'm going to use this very scientific method here of a Excel here. So we have Marathon County. This is 1873. So we're just going to make a division here. Jenny happens to be right here, 31 and 7. And so, excuse me, 1874, the following year, Lincoln County gets created. So we're just going to make a division. And you kind of have to do this because, again, we don't like to have half measures. Basically, we want to keep within the sections that we surveyed it. So we're just going to make this nearest survey south of Merrill, and everything below that stays Marathon County, and everything above that becomes Lincoln County. Great. Except this does not solve the underlying problem of all of these communities on the western edge, does it? And so then in 1874, the other division that happens, and let's see, go back to here, we get the notch. Because in 1875, Taylor County gets established. So Taylor County is created out of 10 townships here from Chippewa, right? If we go back to 1874, it's actually Chippewa County that extends all the way here. So 10 from Chippewa, 10 from Clark, 6 from the new Lincoln County, and 1 from Marathon County, which is interesting. And honestly, I don't know why they just took the 1 or why they got the 1. If we look, this is a little bit later, this is from 1887, you can see the division, the lines here. And then again, you can see the how they don't line up. And so you sometimes will see these sort of sections that are added that are technically part of the wider, it's weird. The point is though, Medford's right here. So if you kept Marathon County this nice rectangle that it was, right? If we go back to this, then it's going to be really close to Medford, this new Medford. So we're going to need Taylor County to take that. Now, why did they not take this one as well? You know, why is Bern, the county, which is now the town of Bern, why did that not go to Taylor? I don't know. Presumably the people in Wausau at the county seat had a little bit of sway, and so we're able to keep hold of that. But in any way, what ends up happening is we have and this is 1878, finally, about 2 years after all this shakes down, you have a Taylor and a Marathon County that are sort of interconnected there, each with a little notch in the corner, each of them not really perfect rectangles, but, you know, coexisting. As you can kind of tell, there's a lot of uncertainties here. A lot of this stuff I am guessing based off of what I've read, but I haven't like been down to look through the governmental archives and see if there's committee meetings about the discussions. A lot of this happened down in Madison in the legislature. So I don't know specifically. Maybe there's an actual good reason for this other than, you know, hey, why not? But the result is interesting because Marathon County is this shape, which it remains, right? And I think there's something interesting. Like, this isn't a bad thing. Like, it's not like, oh, Taylor County, they kept us from being a rectangle. Because ultimately, I think, you know, this doesn't look the same, right? Having that notch in the top left corner there, that's part of what makes Marathon County to this day. It gives it kind of a unique identity. It would be boring to just be a nice square polygon like that. Having these extra divisions makes it interesting, and it speaks to an interesting story. So, yeah. I guess that's the extent of kind of what I got back, going here. What I will say is that just because 1870s we get the familiar shape, the exterior boundaries of Marathon County are established, that doesn't mean that we're ready, you know, everything's done. In fact, within the boundaries, we're still figuring out what the townships, where the villages, where the cities are going to be. In 1876 or 75, when Taylor County finally takes that notch, you know, Wausau, the city, the capital seat, is only a city for a few years. It becomes a city in, oh, just gonna go past this. It becomes a city in 1872. And so next week, just to continue the March MAPness thing here, the theme, the thread for the month, Gary Gisselman will be joining us, and he will be telling you about this specific map, or maps like this, bird's eye view sketches that were done. And this one is not too long after Wausau becomes a city. And so by looking at this, we can get a good sense of, you know, what things were like, even though, you know, it's not photographic perfect, you know, like taking a picture would be. It's as good as we have, and it is really interesting to see what's here. So that's the plan for that. Okay. Let's see here. I'm just gonna go back to put this up. I'm gonna check to see if there's any questions. Thanks for watching. I hope this was enjoyable and you learned a little bit about how Marathon County came to be. If you have any questions, again, about this or other maps or anything else, hang out for a bit. Rarely do, but that's all right. Not everybody can watch us live, and not everybody has questions necessarily, so that's okay. But yeah, it should be a fun thing. We got some fun maps coming up of different types and some interesting stories that'll be shown in them. So I'm looking forward to sharing more maps in the next weeks to come. Hopefully you continue to join and watch. Yeah, I guess maybe it's pretty close to 1 there, and won't bother stalling anymore. I'll hang out. I guess if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them in the comments or what have you. But I think we'll call it there. Again, as always, thanks for watching. It's great that people are interested in local history enough to tune in. Yeah, we'll see you next time. Have a wonderful week in the meantime.